The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has slapped Wells Fargo with a $1 billion fine because of some of its behavior toward its consumers that unfairly led to some repossessions of their cars and issues with their mortgages. So the $1 billion fine against Wells Fargo is punishment for the banking giant's actions in its mortgage and auto loan businesses. Now, when it comes to the auto loans, the issue centers around something known as force-placed insurance. So essentially what happens is the lender, in this case Wells Fargo, will lend the money for an individual to purchase the car, but there are certain standards or certain things that the person needs to fulfill. So they want to ensure that the person gets insurance. So if they get into a car accident or if the car is totaled, the insurance will pay for the loss and that Wells Fargo wouldn't have to deal with that loss, right? Now, what would happen is people would get the insurance that they were supposed to get, and then Wells Fargo would end up purchasing more insurance on their behalf, even though they didn't need to do it. So the way the Wells Fargo auto loan unit handled consumers' accounts exposed people to hundreds of thousands of dollars in premiums and fees. The issues were also found to have possibly contributed to thousands of cars being repossessed. So to get a little more specific, Wells Fargo even acknowledged this. They acknowledged that the roughly 2 million car loans that it put into that program, it forcibly placed duplicative or unnecessary insurance on hundreds of thousands of those borrowers' vehicles. So in one 5-year period from 2011 to 2016, the bank acknowledged in a settlement that the extra costs of force-placed insurance may have played a role in at least 27,000 customers having their vehicles repossessed. It's insane.
So let's break down a couple of things here. First of all, this is why we need to protect the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is right now being dismantled by Mick Mulvaney and the Trump administration, because they get you your money back and they look out for you when you've been robbed. Now, Wells Fargo or any giant financial institution is not going to agree to pay a $1 billion fine unless they did it. They don't go around going, oh, we didn't really do that, and we have an army of lawyers here, but we'll pay you $1 billion anyway, especially during the Trump administration. Boy, they really did it. And they probably made more than $1 billion and are happy to give back some of the money that they took from you, arguably stole from you. Of course, I'm gonna say during the Trump administration, but it's also true in the Obama administration, the Bush administration, no one ever goes to jail. You steal $10 from somebody on the street and you're going to prison, okay? You steal $1 billion, you're not going to go anywhere near prison. So it's another fine, another slap on the wrist. I'll give you context. Wells Fargo just reported for the first quarter of this year, $5.9 billion in profit, not revenue, in profit. Understand, first quarter of the year, not the whole year. So that's 6 times 4, they're gonna make $24 billion in profit this year. So $1 billion, they're like, ba-ding, thank you very much, no big deal. This is not an accident, this is their business model.
Right. So Nomi, I wanted to ask you a little bit about this fine because everyone's reporting it as a record fine and it is larger compared to other fines that, Wells Fargo has had to pay. But is this really punishment? No one's really dug into that and I'm curious what you think.
Right, well, first of all, if a person stole a car, it would be a felony. One person, one car, one felony.
Right.
So this is not just hundreds of thousands of dollars of adjustments to insurance that didn't need to happen on cars or the repossession of 27,000 cars. This is like technically multiple felonies. It is stealing, it is taking cars. But be that as it may, the $1 billion fine, and Cenk, you're right, you don't pay $1 billion fine unless you've made a good $5 or $6 billion off the back end of that. You just don't. You're settling. You're not saying, oh, here, have it all, like twice as much because we'll never do it again. Which, by the way, Tim Sloan, who's now the CEO of Wells Fargo, after the last time they billed customers for overcharging them on fake accounts they created over a year and a half ago and settled for that for just $100 million, tiny fraction of the billion. Yeah. He said everything would be fine, it'd be good. And he's actually in charge of these retail divisions that do this. And he's now the CEO and he just had a 37% raise last year. So putting all that aside, the $1 billion actually isn't the biggest fine. They paid multiple billions of dollars for mortgage-related abuses and fraud going into the financial crisis. This is merely the biggest fine per bank that the Consumer Financial Protection Board has been able to negotiate. And that is true, and that is very large, and that is one of the reasons they should continue to be around and not be defunded and dismantled by the guy who's currently in charge of them, Mick Mulvaney. But the real problem here is that these banks are continually able to process customers, to process accounts and add charges, whether it is in credit cards, whether it's in fake accounts, whether it's in auto loans, whether it's in mortgage insurance, because they are conglomerates that are allowed to not just loan you money for your car, to not just loan you money for your house, but to basically make you also potentially buy insurance products that you might need and many insurance products that you don't need, and take money from you, because the last thing anyone wants to do when they're beholden to a bank for money, and the bank has the ability to repossess their car or foreclose on their house, is to not pay what they're asked to pay. And that is when this becomes stealing.
So if you notice, the errors for the banks never go in the other direction. They never make $1 billion mistake on your behalf, right?
That's right.
It's always in one direction. It makes me wonder if they're not just simple errors, or if in fact it is what they are told to do. And they even had an internal review that told them, you're ripping people off. And they're like, yeah, whatever. They totally ignored it. The reason they ignored it is, again, it's not the bug, it's the feature. It's their business model. They're like, these guys have no power. There's almost no one in government to check us. And even if they do, we just pay them a small fraction of our profits, and then they go away. So, as you look at this, when I was growing up, and probably still for a lot of people in their heads, we got a lot of propaganda that big corporations, they wouldn't do things like this. They're a reputable company. Otherwise, they'll get in trouble. But what you have to understand is for decades, they have not. There's no cops on the beat. So they now feel like they are above the law. They have the power and you have none. So they'll add as many extra fees onto you as humanly possible because they know they're gonna get away with it. They're not gonna go to prison for those felonies. Instead, as Nomi pointed out, they're gonna get a raise. And if Wells Fargo was actually upset, they would fire their executives instead of saying, great job, here's a huge raise, which means do it again.
Actually, just to juxtapose Wells Fargo to a different bank that isn't one of these huge banks, Abacus, from during the economic meltdown, you had regulators trying to make it seem as though they were being hard on the banks. And so they go after Abacus, which was a small bank. And they made them there was mortgage fraud happening, okay? But it wasn't something, based on what I saw, it wasn't something that higher level individuals at the bank knew about, right? There were a couple people that were doing bad things and they faced charges for it. But regulators did like this whole perp walk thing. It was disgusting. It really was. And there is such thing as too big to jail, right? Or too big to fail, but there is such thing as small enough to jail.
Right.
And and it's just disgusting to juxtapose how those bankers were treated versus these huge banks.
But it's exactly that. Those bankers make the regulators look good to themselves, mostly because we actually understand the difference. The biggest 6 banks in this country paid $110 billion worth of fines for crimes related to the mortgage crisis. $110 billion, 6 banks. There is no other sector, there is no other industry for which you can continue to basically waste our money and our time with the Department of Justice and every other regulator and come out with having to settle for $110 billion of fines, have no one jailed, have no restrictions on your business. And this Wells Fargo thing, it's one of many types of things. This happens to have been caught right now. It happens to have been what was looked at. But the reality is if you are a bank with those kind of levels of consumers, you have the ability to rip them off. And as your level of clients goes up, you have a bigger ability to rip them off. And it takes longer or never for regulators to figure that out.
So look, Nomi's a real expert on this. Managing director of Goldman Sachs has written these books, Collusion, which by the way, the link to buying that is in the description box if you're watching on YouTube or the comment section on Facebook. And you should really check out how this really works. But I'll add my 2 cents on what I know about the finance industry. I have friends who work there. I went to business school. And what I'm hearing back from folks is, if you're, to Anna's point, if you're politically connected, you're gonna be just fine. But if you're not politically connected, meaning you're not giving a lot of money to politicians, they're gonna wanna make an example out of you, because that ironically protects the people giving money to politicians even more. It gives an appearance of doing something about it, and they go, look at this financial executive I put in jail. Now, in the case of the financial collapse, it was like a 27-year-old or whatever that they put in prison. The only other guy that went to prison from the big banks was a guy on the board of Goldman Sachs who actually sold out the other guys on the board of Goldman Sachs. Never steal from rich people, you will go to prison. Okay, steal from the average American, you're gonna get away with it 100% of the time. Unfortunately, in our system where money and politics controls all of our politicians. And so it lets them seem like they're being tough on financial crime when they go after people like Abacus, but it also has the benefit of eliminating the competition for the big banks.
Yeah.
Oh God, this system is so corrupt. And if you allow these bankers to keep buying our politicians, they will run our government and eventually they will cause another crash. It's an absolute guarantee.
If you become a member of the Young Turks, you'll be saying,
you know, I'm like a smart person.
So do it right now, tytnetwork.com/join. Get the whole Young Turks show every day.